The first rays of morning light gently spilled through the sheer curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I stood by the open window, letting the crisp air fill my lungs as the city slowly began to wake beneath me. From up here, everything seemed so peaceful. The sound of birds chirping in the distance, the faint hum of early commuters heading out to start their day, and the golden light painting the skyline in a way that made everything feel possible. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug of coffee, savoring the comforting heat against my fingers. For the first time in what felt like ages, I wasn't in a rush. The usual hurried frenzy of emails, meetings, and to-do lists felt like a distant memory, as if the day itself had decided to slow down and offer me a moment to simply breathe. I quickly slipped into my running clothes and headed out for a jog. Running had always been my way of starting the day with a clean slate, a ritual that kept me grounded. I sped through the empty streets, away from the noise of the waking city. The wind cooled my skin as it passed through the thin fabric of my shirt, and my pulse slowly returned to its normal rhythm. When I got back home, I found a short note from Mike on the kitchen table. "Left for work. We need to talk about the weekend." Brief and dry, without any warmth, but I was used to that. Mike was a man of action, always focused on his projects, his mind often far away from us. I turned on the coffee machine, and while waiting for the cup to fill, I caught my reflection in the window. In the distance, beyond the glass, rose the tall office buildings, where our own separate worlds awaited us. Reports, calls, meetings. Places where it seemed people lived, but in reality, they were more like machines. I wondered how Mike and I had ended up here, in this sterile, lifeless space. But the morning went on. I made a few quick calls at work, set up some meetings, and by 9 o'clock, I was already at my desk. Surrounded by colleagues, each immersed in their own concerns, everything moved perfectly, like clockwork. No one noticed what I was feeling, that something inside me had shifted. During the lunch break, I was still checking emails. Usually, I would take a book with me or go for a walk, but today I wanted a bit of company. I returned to my desk and saw my new colleague, Caitlin, organizing some documents on hers. She had recently transferred from another department. "Rachel, you seem a little distracted today," she said with a smile when she noticed me watching her. "Just a long morning," I replied, trying to brush off my thoughts. "Maybe you should take a break?" she suggested, nodding toward the coffee machine. Sometimes a small change of scenery helps. The evening was surprisingly quiet. I got home a little earlier than usual, and the apartment was completely silent. More than an hour had passed when I heard a light knock on the door. Standing at the threshold was Ethan, our neighbor from the same floor. We had recently crossed paths in the parking lot when I was trying to fix a stuck car lock. "Hey, Rachel, sorry to bother you," he began, smiling a bit awkwardly. "I've got a small problem. The power went out in my apartment, and I was wondering if you could help me fix it." "Of course," I smiled in response. "I think I can help." Grabbing a flashlight, I followed him to his place. The atmosphere there was different. Cozy, but at the same time a little chaotic, as if things had been placed randomly, yet it gave the place a certain charm. "Thanks for coming over." "It's nothing," I replied. When the lights came back on, Ethan smiled so genuinely that I couldn't help but smile back. There was a certain spark in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in myself for a long time. "You did a great job," he said cheerfully. "Maybe you'd like to stay for a cup of coffee? Or some wine?" I hesitated for a moment. "Why not?" I answered, surprising even myself. We sat on his couch, and soon the wine was poured into glasses and the conversation flowed easily. At first, we talked about little things, how life was in the neighborhood, who was working on what projects. But gradually, the conversation deepened, as if a bridge of trust had formed between us. I began sharing how I hadn't felt like myself for a long time, how it seemed like I was swimming against the current, and even my closeness with Mike had turned into a mere formality. Ethan listened attentively, never interrupting, only asking the occasional question. I couldn't remember the last time someone had listened to me so carefully. At some point, I realized that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't talking about work, plans, or problems. I was talking about myself, about what truly mattered to me. You know, Rachel, he said, looking at me thoughtfully, sometimes life brings us to a dead end, and we forget that we can simply take another path. His words struck a chord deep inside me. I stayed quiet, feeling that something more than just a conversation over a glass of wine was hanging in the air. After that evening, I felt a little different, though I couldn't quite say what had changed. Ethan and I started bumping into each other more often, whether in the hallway or the parking lot. He always smiled, always found a reason to chat. One evening, when Mike was once again working late, I spontaneously decided to call Ethan. "Hey," I began, not quite believing I was doing this. "I was wondering if you're busy. I could stop by for a bit." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Of course, come over. I just made dinner. Want to join me?" His invitation caught me off guard, but I agreed. After all, what's the harm in spending time with a neighbor? It's just a friendly visit. But something inside me whispered that this evening wouldn't be so simple. When I walked into his apartment, it smelled delicious. The aroma of freshly cooked dinner filled the air. The kitchen was cozy, a small table set for two. Ethan moved so easily, so casually, that I immediately felt myself relax. We ate pasta with glasses of wine, talking about everything, from his life before moving to the city, to our travels, to the books he'd been reading lately. After dinner, we settled on the couch with our wine, and the conversation took a deeper turn. Ethan started talking about his dreams, how he'd always wanted to be a writer, but life had pushed him into something more practical. I opened up to him about my own feelings, confessing that I hadn't pursued what truly inspired me for a long time. We talked about missed opportunities and how hard it can be to step off the familiar path. "You're so strong, Rachel," Ethan said, his voice softening as his eyes locked with mine. "I look at you and see someone who deserves more than just coasting through life." His words sank deeper than I expected. I wanted to respond, but I couldn't find the right words. In the silence that hung between us, I felt Ethan slowly move closer to me. His hand rested on mine, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Attention, warmth, genuine interest. He leaned in, and before I could process what was happening, I felt his lips on mine. It was a short, tender kiss, but everything inside me shifted. The kiss grew more passionate, and we spent the rest of the evening together, immersed in a warmth that felt so far removed from the everyday routine. It wasn't just a physical moment. It was the feeling of being alive again. In the morning, when I returned home, the silence of the apartment overwhelmed me. I closed the door behind me and paused for a moment, listening to what was happening inside me. The night with Ethan had passed, leaving me with mixed feelings, a sweetness of memories and the heavy weight of realizing what I had done. The dizzying freedom I felt with him quickly gave way to an oppressive sense of guilt. I glanced at the clock. Mike was due back soon from his morning run. I had only a few minutes to pull myself together, to erase the traces of the night from my face. I sat on the bed, feeling a knot of shame growing in my chest. I had betrayed the man I had tied my life to. But what was worse was that I couldn't even tell if I regretted what I had done. Mike came home as usual in his workout clothes, carrying a bottle of water. He walked into the bedroom, giving me a brief smile as if nothing had changed. And indeed, for him, nothing had changed. He continued to live in his world, where I was still part of his stable, orderly life. "How was your run?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "As always," he replied dismissively. "I think we should meet with my colleagues next weekend. There's a small work event coming up. You'll come, right?" His question was simple, but it carried more than just a weekend plan. It was an attempt to hold on to our family's us, which was slowly unraveling. I nodded silently, feeling something tighten inside me. The days passed in their usual rhythm. I tried to immerse myself back into my normal life, but nothing felt the same. My thoughts constantly drifted back to Ethan, his words, his gaze that night. A week after that night, I found an envelope on my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a short note. I know. I clenched the letter in my hand, feeling a chill run down my spine. Someone knew what had happened. Panic washed over me, and my mind spun in chaos. Who could have seen us? That same evening, I saw Mike again, and for the first time in a long time, I was afraid to look him in the eye. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the growing sense of anxiety. Every time I approached the mailbox, I expected to find a new envelope, a new threat. And I wasn't wrong. 2 days after the first note, I received another. This won't end well. This time, the fear paralyzed me. I carried the letter home where Mike sat calmly at his laptop, absorbed in his work, unaware of anything. But my world was falling apart, and I felt like I could no longer keep everything under control. I had avoided directly talking to Ethan, but after the second note, I decided to text him. There were no accusations or hints in the message, just a request to meet. Ethan looked worried when I walked into the cafe. I sat across from him, feeling the tension between us growing. My head was filled with too many questions, but I decided to start with the most important one. Ethan, I exhaled, trying not to let my panic show. Someone knows about us. I've been getting letters and they're becoming more threatening. Do you have any idea who might be doing this? Ethan frowned, his face serious. Letters? He seemed genuinely surprised. I have no idea who that could be, Rachel. Do you think it's someone from the building or… I don't know. I interrupted him. But it's definitely someone who saw us. Someone's watching me, watching us, and they clearly want to do something. We need to be more careful, Ethan finally said. This isn't just some prank if they're really following us, but… He looked at me more confidently. You understand that we need to stop this, right? This has gone too far. I nodded, though everything inside me resisted. We both knew that continuing our relationship would only complicate things, but the thought of ending it brought a pain I wasn't ready to face. I glanced out the window, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us even now. We agreed to keep our distance, to stop meeting. However, the next day, I found another envelope in the mailbox. This time, the note came with several photos, pictures of me and Ethan sitting in the cafe. Someone had been watching us even when we thought no one could see. Fear consumed me entirely. Every time I opened the mailbox, my throat went dry. Another note, another piece of evidence that someone knew far too much. But the worst moment was when I found the photographs. Clear shots taken the day Ethan and I met at the cafe. Sharp, as if taken from up close. In one of them, my hand was resting on his. In another, our tense faces were visible. I couldn't take it anymore. The decision came quickly. I contacted a private investigator a colleague had once recommended. His name was Mark, and from the start, he gave off the impression of someone who wasn't afraid of challenges. I explained the situation to him, showed him the letters and the photographs. Mark examined them carefully and said he would get to work immediately. One evening, about a week after Mark had started his investigation, I got a call from Ethan. His voice was strained. Rachel, I found something out, he began, his words rushing out as if he was afraid of missing something. We need to meet. This is important. We met at the same cafe where we usually had coffee. You won't believe this, but the letters, the photos, it was all me. I can't explain why I did it, he said, avoiding my gaze. I thought it would make you choose. I was silent. Inside, a storm of emotions raged. Anger, disappointment, fear, betrayal. How could someone I trusted do this to me? You wanted to scare me? I finally whispered, trying to hold back tears. You really thought this was the best way to make me choose you? Ethan didn't answer. His silence was louder than any words. I stood up, no longer wanting to hear his explanations. I was hurt. But what hurt even more was realizing that the person I had spent the last few months with had turned out to be so cruel and manipulative. I left the cafe, feeling like the world around me was collapsing. I walked through the streets, oblivious to the people, the cars, the glow of the streetlights. When I returned home, I found Mike, as usual, immersed in his work. He looked up when I came in, and for a moment, I thought I saw something cautious flicker in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, setting his laptop aside. "You look tired." "We need to talk," I began, trying to keep myself steady. "I need to confess. These past few months, I've been unfaithful, Mike." Mike was silent. His face was unreadable, as though he was trying to process what to do with this information. "I knew something was going on," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "You haven't really been here these past months, Rachel. I could feel it." "Mike, I know you want to try," I said, my voice trembling. "And honestly, that means more to me than you can imagine. But I can't live the way we did anymore. I can't go back to being the person I used to be when I was with you. Something in me has changed, and I need to accept that." Mike stayed quiet for a long time. I could see him struggling with himself, with the emotions he probably still had for me. "I understand," he finally said. "But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." Those words echoed in the room, hanging in the air between us. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city, still alive outside the glass. Ahead of me was a path. Uncertain, difficult, but mine alone. And though I was scared, I knew it was the right choice. I decided to leave. Not because I wanted someone else, but because I couldn't stay in the cage I had built for myself any longer. Mike deserved the truth, deserved the chance to find someone who would truly be there for him in a way I no longer could. "I'm going to leave for a while," I said, turning to face him. "I need time to figure things out. I know this is hard, but I hope we can find a different path. For both of us."